David Farmerie right here, the man in the pink shirt and the black beret. That's him right there. Fabulous artist. David was part of the South, and still part of the South Library. I had a show down here, and had the most amazing photographs of tobacco fields that I can still picture them on a small road behind us. Very, very, very strong. And a few weeks ago, David came in the office and said, I want to show you something. And he took out his little iPad, and it was a series of photographs that I just fell in love with. And they were the 7 deadly sins as he envisions them and created them. And they're all on the back wall down there. And you guys don't know this, but there's actually an 8th sin. It's right here on this red bag.
This is the 21st century.
And I'm going to show it to you in a minute, but not yet. And the museum in Clarksville commissioned you to do the 7 deadly sins. Please look at them. Of course, gluttony, pride, lust, greed, wrath, envy, sloth. I've always been fascinated with sloth. I don't know what sloth is, but it's always been slimy sloth, you know, whatever. But they commissioned you to do this. So how did that conversation start?
I got a phone call. Well, it actually started, technically, where one evening the curator for the museum was over at the house, and we were on the deck and libating and eating. And the conversations went all over the place. And I vaguely remember at some point I said something about something regarding 7 deadly sins, and then I moved on to something else. And 4 or 5 months later, I got a call from the curator, and she said, you remember you were talking about 7 deadly sins? And I said, no. And she said, well, I've been thinking about it ever since, and the museum wants to commission you to interpret the 7 deadly sins for an exhibition. I said, okay. And I was waiting for more. And there was silence. And I said, well, what do you want? We want to commission you to interpret the 7 deadly sins. And that was all the information I got. So in that very moment, it was, I think, every artist's greatest dream come true and every artist's nightmare realized simultaneously. Because it's like, oh my God, they want me to do this. I have all this creative freedom. Oh my God, what will I do? And really, I mean, it was, and Pat said it. And that's how it all began. You know, and then the process of this.
So they didn't give you any guidelines?
They gave me none, other than this is when we want to open the exhibition.
So how did you come to decide, okay, I will do this in the studio. I will do this with the very beautiful Jamie Lachal, who's right there.
Yes.
She's how did you come up with that concept?
Well, I started, and for the first, I was listening to Wayne talk, and he was talking about the importance of sketching. And I've never sketched anything before in my life. And in fact, sketching, my ability to sketch is why I became a photographer. but I felt it was important to start sketching, to get a concept down, because this was a commission, this was art. So sketching and sketching. And at the same time, I was thinking about props and all of this, and a model. And it took, I don't know, sweetheart, about 3 months, 4 months, at least, to find a model. Because my criteria in finding a model, and I don't want this to sound the right way, and since somebody's taping, I guess I can say it, and I'll just deny it later, but my criteria in finding a model was I needed to have a model that not only looked the part, but that had substance, and it had a brain, I mean a deep thinking brain. And that was difficult. So we looked and looked, and my wife actually found Jamie, and she found her on a modeling site, and she came to me one night, and she said, oh, I found the model, and I looked, I said, well, maybe it'll work, maybe, and I had interviewed dozens. And Jamie lives in Chattanooga, so I said, I emailed her on the site, and I said, yes, so I'm doing, are you interested? And she said yes, and, so I drove to Chattanooga, and I met her for coffee. And literally within 1, maybe 2 minutes of sitting down to talk with her, I knew she was the model. She had so much depth, and when I talked to her about this and I showed her my sketchbook, she understood it. She understood everything that I wanted. And so that was the beginning of this relationship. And then we went into the process of making the photographs. And one of the things that I required of Jamie, and I told her up front, is that I want it to be a collaboration. So that when we go into the studio, this is what I want, but I want your input. And she was all too happy to give it, and that was really great. In fact, Lust, which was the first image that we shot, and I owe the credit for that image entirely to Jamie, because I went into this and I set up the studio and I had my curmudgeons in there and I had them blind, I had all that stuff up. And we shot it. And we spent, how long did we spend? An hour, hour and a half, 2 hours shooting that. And then that was it for the day. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to leave it set up in the studio. We'll come back in the morning. I'll tear it down. We'll do the next one. I came in the next morning, and Jamie said, David, I've thought about this all night. And I just don't think that she, being the model, the subject, would have reacted that way. I said, okay, well, how would she have reacted? So she showed me, and I photographed it. And that's what's on the wall. So that was the real blessing of this, and truly, I couldn't have made this exhibition happen without Jamie, and I mean, I'm very serious about that.
Come over here, James. Everyone see it. Where did you get the definitions? I mean, because I truly do not know what sloth is.
Okay, well, you know,
Okay,
so first of all, before I go into that, let me just clarify for you, Paul, so you can move on in this part of your life. Paul, I'm trying to tell you. Sloth, the original meaning for sloth was severe melancholy. And the way it was described is that someone who perhaps lost a loved one, is they lamented over that loved one forever. They couldn't regain society. They couldn't do anything. They just stayed at home and lamented. And again, with 7 deadly sins, part of my conceptualizing was to take it and leave it rooted in its original 4th, 5th century origins, but also to bring it into the 21st century.
Right, to reinterpret.
Yeah. So with sloth, I just took it a little bit further and portrayed it as severe depression.
I asked because that's the one we printed in the magazine.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, so that was it.
But originally, these were much larger prints.
They were.
These were sea prints.
Yeah, we started out with the museum as, I think they were 20 by 30 inches, the print size. And at the time, I thought that a sea print, a chromogenic print, was the way to go. And that's what I did. And it worked pretty well. But then when I met with Ann and she said she wanted to have this exhibition here, and we sat down, and again, you talk about collaboration. I can't speak enough about Ann, I'm sorry, and we collaborated on this, and Brian and Tinnen, and Jessica, they all pitched in, and we decided to downsize them physically a little bit, but also to reprint them. And these are now printed as archival pigment prints, and they're printed on a Hanemule, fine art pearl, which this paper for me just really brought out the richness so much more than the sea prints. In fact, I have the sea prints back at home, at the house. And when I would look at these and I would compare them next to the sea print, the detail and the richness that came out in these was far superior.
Well, we're going to get this out here. It's not actually a pizza, and it feels like
Well, Paul, actually, that's the one thing we didn't tell you.
And I know nothing about this other than I came in here tonight and you showed it to me. But it's called the 8th Sin. And tell me a little, why did you feel compelled to do an 8th one? I mean, you wanted to... Well,
originally when Ann and company and I were talking about this exhibition, they wanted 8 images, or 8 framed pieces, and the original idea was, well, just do, since there are only 7 sins, is do one that's just, little did they know, yeah.
Okay, so we've got to come up with a name for this, because I don't think
no, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm leaving it titled The 8th Sin, but each and every one of you are welcome to title it on your own. So.
All right, well, here it is. It's the 8th one right there. Not quite sure what it is, but I see a cigarette, I see Jamie, and a skeleton, and it will be on display over there. So if you guys want to give it a name, give it a name. We will christen the 8th Sin maybe before the 90s. Fantastic. Listen, I've had a great time talking with both of you. Any more questions, please, for David or for Wayne before we go? Anything from? Yeah, please, Nick.
Well, with the 8th Sin, I mean, obviously with the others, you have guidelines, you have a direction. You got sloth or envy or anger or whatever. What was your inspiration for the 8th?
Life. No, really. And that to me is the blessing of this image. And this image has never been shown before. When the exhibition opened at the museum, and even when it toured for a while, it was only the 7 deadly sins. It was for Anne that I created the 8th. But for me, you know, maybe I shouldn't say this, but for me, this is, of all of the images in this exhibition, that's the most provocative. It maybe is because I was there, I don't know, but this, in the relationship that I saw unfold between Bucky, the naked one, and Jamie. Yes.
But what were you going for? I mean, when you laid this out, what was
I think it's pretty
the
obvious.
sentiment?
Let's just say that
The cigarettes on the wall.
Yeah, we can't quite.
for me, Paul, there was a sentiment of, shall we say, exhaustion.
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 Oh,
Yes, it was on my part. Well, in part, but yes.
Brian has a name for it. Where's Brian?
Brian.
Brian, what is it?
No, well, you were talking about, you know, what's a good 21st century sin.
Right.
And I said, you know, with Facebook and Facebook stalking, not that I ever do that, but you can see, you know, everybody's pictures, and I said voyeurism is probably a good
Yeah.
one.
And Bucky has his
I
own.
love that. I love
He
that.
has his own page now, Bucky does.
I guess don't pay
He
attention.
does. And I would like to just add for the record, since Brian brought that up, that in no way was there any voyeurism on my part when I made this film.
Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
It doesn't look to me like the 21st century sin at all. It looks to me like, I don't know if you'd call it a sin, but it looks to me like an indulgence that has been going on forever, which is that of very, very older men going out with luscious.
What do you call it?
And you know, I told you not to sit there, Nick.
It's very warm in here.
On so many levels, you're absolutely right. And it isn't really a sin unless you were raised Catholic. And it's just terrible to thought that no holy water can erase. But no, it isn't. In that sense, you're absolutely right. The older man, and he is a bit older, I guess. Well, we don't know that actually. Bucky could have ended up like this when he was, who knows, 17, 18. We don't know. So, but if he, yeah, I can, and so feel
I'm
free
going
to.
with that one.
Bob, did you have a question?
Now, if you know the story of Nelson Rockefeller, the former
There you go.
of New York State.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, anything else?
the rest of the
Life crisis.
Yes.
The end of
Not
life
the
crisis.
midlife crisis, the end of life crisis.
Well, I mean, the actual French translation for orgasm is little death, right?
I never heard that.
I
I'll buy that.
It's the only French word.
Backstory, the cigarette feels like it's associated with that word.
And I just want to say for the record that that's why I think some men have certain problems at certain times because of that definition.
I don't know if it's